Learn English through story. The Masked Affair. The wind swept through Venice, tugging at the edges of the fine silk curtains in the opulent ballroom of the Grand Palazzo. It was the beginning of autumn, and Venice seemed to pulse with an energy that had little to do with the usual pace of life in the city of canals. The Palazzo, bathed in golden lights, hosted its annual masquerade, an event whose reputation for indulgence and secrecy stretched across Europe. Invitations to this ball were coveted and elusive. This year, the theme was Masks of the Soul, a challenge that invited guests to wear not just a disguise, but a reflection of their innermost selves. It was said that the masks would reveal what the eyes could not see. Among those who received an invitation was Isabella Montrose, a young woman of Parisian aristocracy, known more for her lineage than her fortune. She had inherited her beauty and grace from her mother, but she had also inherited a heavy heart, one that bore the weight of familial expectation and societal constraint. Isabella was a woman trapped between the life she had been born into and the one she longed to live, a woman burdened by obligations, especially to the ailing fortune of her family. Her father, once a wealthy landowner, had lost much of his wealth to poor investments and the changing tides of European politics. Her mother, still proud and defiant in the face of their diminishing fortune, insisted on maintaining their status. Thus, Isabella was under constant pressure to find a suitable match, someone rich enough to secure her family's future and someone powerful enough to restore the honor that had slipped through their fingers. The Grand Palazzo's invitation arrived just as Isabella was about to attend yet another series of society events. This one, however, was different. It promised to be a spectacle, an opportunity to see and be seen by the wealthiest of Europe's elite. She attended not out of desire for the event itself, but because it was a chance to further her family's ambitions. Yet, her heart was not in it. She had come to hate the games of courtship and the facades of these high society gatherings. The expectations placed upon her felt suffocating. She often wondered whether the wealthy suitors who showed interest in her ever truly saw her, or only the shadow of her name and fortune. And so, Isabella found herself in Venice, standing before the mirror of her hotel room, adjusting the mask that had been specially made for her. It was crafted from deep, glossy black material, adorned with silver filigree and dark feathers. It covered half of her face, leaving only her eyes visible. It was beautiful, elegant, and above all, mysterious. It was a mask of a woman who was neither here nor there, a mask of someone both seen and unseen, a perfect representation of how she felt within her own life. The event began under a sky littered with stars. The gondolas that docked at the Grand Canals carried masked guests in extravagant costumes, each one trying to outdo the other in elegance, mystery, or flamboyance. Isabella entered the ballroom with her head held high, her mask glinting in the candlelight. She moved through the crowd of faces hidden behind gold, silver, and intricate lace. The music, a haunting melody from a string quartet, filled the air as laughter, whispers, and murmurs of intrigue reverberated in the marble halls. It was during this swirl of opulence that she first saw him. He was impossible to miss. Standing at the far end of the ballroom, he was tall, commanding, and dressed in an exquisite red and gold suit that shimmered in the light. His mask was unlike any she had seen. It was half black and half white, symbolizing duality. It was a mask that seemed to contain 1,000 secrets. His dark eyes, visible through the mask's slits, were piercing and observant. He scanned the crowd like a predator, moving with an ease that suggested he was accustomed to control, to being watched, but never fully understood. The man did not seem to care for the adulation of the women around him, nor the eager suitors who tried to strike up conversation. He stood apart, leaning against a marble column, as if he were waiting for something or someone, and then his eyes locked with hers. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She quickly looked away, embarrassed, but she felt the heat of his gaze on her, almost as if it were a tangible thing. For a brief moment, their world seemed to shrink. the voices around them muting as their connection held. She could not explain it, but there was something magnetic about him, something that pulled her in. Despite her better judgment, the night stretched on, and Isabella found herself caught in the whirl of conversation and fleeting glances. Yet, no matter how many people she spoke to, no matter how many polite smiles she exchanged, she could not shake the image of him, the mysterious man in the red and gold suit, the one with the mask that hid more than it revealed. As midnight approached, Isabella stepped out onto the balcony for a breath of cool air. The moonlight bathed the city in a silver glow, and the quiet ripples of the canal below seemed to mirror her unease. Her mind was heavy with the weight of her choices. The man who had caught her attention was a complete stranger, yet she couldn't deny the intrigue he stirred in her. A soft rustling behind her broke her thoughts. She turned to see him standing there, his mask now removed, revealing a sharp jawline and dark hair that fell in waves over his forehead. His eyes were intense, yet there was a certain sadness to them, as if they had seen things that could never be undone. "You look out of place," he said, his voice smooth and low. Isabella raised an eyebrow. "Do I? I think it is everyone else who seems out of place." He chuckled, a sound that was both amused and melancholic. "Perhaps, but I meant you. You carry something beneath your mask, something heavier than the one you wear on your face." Her heart tightened. She hadn't realized how much she had allowed herself to be exposed. "And what makes you think so?" He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because you have the look of someone who has learned to play the game well, but does not truly want to. I see through the masks." Isabella didn't know how to respond. Was he reading her so easily? She had learned to perfect the art of disguise, to show only what was necessary. But here, with him, it felt as though he had pierced straight through her defenses. "You are correct," she said softly. "I wear many masks just as you do. I think everyone here does." He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps, but the difference between you and them is that you are searching for something more, something that this mask, or any mask, cannot hide." His words sent a shiver down her spine. The vulnerability in them made her feel seen, for the first time in a long while. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "but I feel as though I know you." "I am someone who knows the cost of a mask," he replied cryptically. "But it is not the mask that defines us. It is what we choose to hide behind it." Isabella felt a stirring within her. She had heard such words before, but they had never resonated as they did now. Who was this man who seemed to understand her so completely? She had no answers, only more questions. They spent the rest of the night walking through the corridors of the palazzo, engaging in quiet conversation. He told her little about himself, though it was clear that he too was running from something, a past that could not be undone. But as dawn broke over Venice, the time came for Isabella to make a choice. She had danced with the idea of freedom all night, but the reality was that the life she had known was a chain, and the future she had been taught to desire was one of duty, not passion. The man before her, this stranger, represented a world outside her grasp, one of risks and desires. Yet she could not ignore the reality of her family's needs. She had obligations, and her duty was to protect her family's legacy. Before she left the palazzo, he handed her a note. It was simple, elegant, and contained only a few words. "Some masks are meant to be removed, some are not." Isabella kept the note, tucking it away into the folds of her gown, unsure of what it meant. As she made her way back to Paris, her mind remained fixated on the mysterious man. The affair, brief as it had been, had opened a door to a world she had never thought possible. Years passed, and Isabella moved forward with her life, marrying the Baron as expected, and living a life of relative comfort. Yet, no matter how secure she felt in her new position, no matter how many silks and jewels adorned her, she never stopped wondering about that masked affair, the one that had slipped through her fingers like water. Then, one evening, when the last embers of autumn were fading into winter, an unexpected letter arrived. It was not from her husband, nor from her family, but from a stranger. It was the same handwriting as the note he had given her so many years ago. It simply read, "The mask has slipped. Come to Venice. The truth awaits." Isabella's pulse quickened, her heart beating with a mix of fear and anticipation. She had lived a life of compromise, but this was something different, something that promised not security, but truth. She knew then that her past would never be fully buried, nor would the mystery of the masked affair be left unresolved. Isabella's fingers trembled as she held the letter in her hands, the words on the page burning into her mind. "The mask has slipped. Come to Venice. The truth awaits." A chill ran down her spine, as if the letter had been written by someone who knew her more intimately than anyone ever could. It was a call she could not ignore, one that pierced through the layers of her carefully constructed life and beckoned her back to the world she had once dared to leave behind. Her life had been predictable, even comfortable, since her marriage to the Baron. He was wealthy, influential, and kind in his own way, but their union had never been fueled by passion. She had come to accept this fact, buried under the duties of managing their estate and social affairs. But the letter stirred something long dormant within her, a yearning for something more, something real. What had she given up in the name of security? And more importantly, what had she lost in her search for control? She could not answer these questions, but she knew one thing for certain. The mystery of the masked man, the enigma of Lucien, had never truly left her. It lingered in the shadows of her thoughts, and now, the invitation to return to Venice was a chance to confront the truth. Her truth. Isabella made her decision swiftly. She wrote a brief note to her husband, explaining she would be attending a charity event in Venice for a few days. He did not ask many questions. He never did. They both had accepted the comfortable distance between them, and this trip would not disrupt their quiet, unspoken understanding. She left with a sense of quiet determination, knowing that this journey could change everything or nothing at all. When she arrived in Venice, the city had transformed. The once vibrant summer atmosphere had given way to the somber, quiet elegance of autumn. The canals, dark and glistening under the moonlight, whispered of secrets long kept hidden. Isabella made her way to the same grand palazzo, where the masquerade had been held all those years ago. The building stood as majestic as ever, but now, its grand halls were empty and silent, as if waiting for something or someone to stir life into them again. She walked through the front doors and found herself greeted not by a bustling crowd of masked revelers, but by an eerie quiet. The chandeliers, once brilliant with light, now hung like ghosts, their crystals reflecting only the faintest hint of moonlight. It felt as though time had stopped in this place. The echo of laughter and music long faded. The only living presence in the palazzo was a figure waiting for her at the end of the long hallway. It was Lucien. He stood in front of the grand mirror that dominated the room, his back to her. He was dressed in the same red and gold suit he had worn that night years ago, but now there was something more raw about him in intensity, a weariness that had not been there before. The mask he had worn during their first meeting was absent, his features illuminated by the soft light. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. He had not changed, not really, yet everything about him seemed to have deepened, as if the man she had met years ago had been shaped and molded by time and experience, both of which he wore like armor. "Lucien," she whispered, her voice betraying the unease she felt. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers with that same dark intensity she remembered. There was no surprise in his gaze, no question, only recognition of the woman who had never fully embraced the truth he had tried to show her. "Isabella," he said, his voice low and steady, "you've returned. I knew you would." She stepped forward, her eyes searching his face. "I don't understand. What is all of this? Why did you send me that letter?" Lucien took a step closer, and for the first time, Isabella noticed the weight he carried, the shadow in his eyes, the deep lines etched around his mouth. It was as though he had lived 1,000 lifetimes since they last spoke. "You are right to be cautious," he said. "I've lived a life full of masks, just like you. But there comes a time when the truth can no longer be hidden, when the weight of all the lies and half-truths becomes unbearable. I wanted you to know that. Isabella's heart quickened. What truth? What are you saying? Lucien's eyes softened, and he reached out, taking her hand gently in his. I'm not who you think I am. I was never just a nobleman, a count with wealth and status. I was born into a different world, one of danger and deceit, a world that shaped me in ways you cannot imagine. She pulled her hand back, her heart racing. But you, your family, your title. Lucien smiled bitterly, his gaze shifting away from her for a moment. My family was built on lies. The title I bear is just that, an empty title, given to me when my real identity was erased. I was a part of a network of spies and informants, working for powerful men who used me as a tool, a pawn in a dangerous game. I escaped that life years ago, but it has haunted me ever since. Isabella felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The man she had danced with, the man she had briefly known, was not the nobleman he had seemed to be. He was a man with a past full of secrets and shadows, a man who had been forced to wear a mask, even before he had donned the elaborate costume that night at the masquerade. But why did you come to me? She asked, her voice trembling. Why bring me into this? Lucien's eyes locked with hers again. Because I wanted to show you that there is another way to live. A life without the masks, without the expectations. You've been trapped, Isabella. I saw it the moment I met you. You hide behind your name, your family, your marriage to someone who doesn't truly know you. You've been living a life of obligation, a life that's never truly yours. His words were a balm to a wound she hadn't even known was still open. All these years, she had been carrying the weight of duty, pretending to be something she was not, all in the name of family honor and security. And what are you asking of me? She whispered. Lucien stepped closer, his voice a soft entreaty. I'm asking you to see me for who I am, and I'm asking you to see yourself for who you really are. You don't need to live in the shadows anymore, Isabella. You can choose. For a long moment, Isabella stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. The decision before her was one that could change everything. To step into the light, to tear off the mask that had defined her life. Could she do that? Could she truly embrace a future that was uncertain? A future that did not promise the safety and control she had long sought? She looked into Lucien's eyes, and for the first time, she saw a man who was not afraid to be seen. She saw a man who had chosen to live on his own terms, who had found a way to shed the layers of lies that had bound him. And in that moment, she realized she could choose the same. I choose you, she said, her voice steady, her eyes never leaving his. I choose truth. Lucien's face softened, his dark eyes filled with a quiet relief. He reached out, taking her hand once more. Then let us walk this path together. No more masks, no more lies. And so, in the heart of Venice, beneath the shadow of the Grand Palazzo, Isabella Montrose made her choice. She had spent so many years hiding behind the expectations of others, behind the mask of propriety and duty. But now, for the first time in her life, she would step into the light, not as someone's daughter, someone's wife, or someone's legacy, but as herself. The truth, she realized, was the most freeing thing of all. And in the end, the mask was no longer needed. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoy, then please like and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel.